In this module, we're going to basically recreate the visualization that we did in the previous module, but instead of using the offset command, we're going to use VLookup. And the main purpose of doing this is just to show you that there's various ways to accomplish the same task in Excel, and to show you another way that you can create a interactive visualization for the user. So we're going to start by creating the fake set of data, very similar to how we did in the previous exercise. We'll change the color background to just make it white so that we can have a nice background to start with here. Make sure everything is centered. And then we'll make up some region names: East, West, South, Midwest, Pacific, Mountain. Just a couple of them here. And then we'll do the same thing where we'll use the random function, using a uniform distribution to multiply by 100,000 to create a value for sales. And take that across. And then we'll do the same thing where we're just going to, as we saw before, if we hit F9, it's going to generate new data for us each time, random values. So all we're going to do here is copy this data and then paste it as actual values. Now, just as before, somebody could come in here and create a line chart, and again, it's not going to provide a really good view of the data. But what we can do is, using VLookup, we can select these values here, and we can create a list, a named list, like we had done in one of our previous modules on the basics of Excel. So we can call this collection of items regions, and we hit enter. And now we've basically created a named value within Excel that is referencing these particular cells as regions. Now what we can do down here is, let's start by taking this data that we have up here and just copying and pasting it. We'll get this to look halfway decent. I'm going in here and changing the line color, and there we go. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the under the data tab, we're going to do the data validation on the drop down, so that in this particular cell here, we will allow a list that will only be from regions. And by doing that, since we named regions before, since we've selected that as region, we're able to see those on the drop-down list, which is nice. Now, we can then use VLookup, like we learned earlier. We're going to look up the value that is in cell B11, and we want to make sure that that's locked, because we're going to drag this across the other cells. So we hit F4 to lock in that reference. And then what are we going to do? We're going to look it up from this array. And again, the same thing, we'll want to lock this down, because as we drag it, we want the array to stay the same. And now this is one part that's a little bit tricky. If we're going to be looking up January, we're going to be looking up the second column. And then we would want to put a 2 here, because obviously the first one is just the region. We want to look at what's in January. So the next one would be 3 and 4. So there's different ways to do this. We can manually type it in. So we'll put in false. We want an exact match. So what we could do is we could drag this across here. And you can see it's going to be the same because the 2 doesn't increment. It stays the same all across here. So we could go to each one of them and change this to be a 3 and a 4. All the way across here. But what would probably be a little bit easier is just to put some values on the top, and then let's just reference those values. So now as I increment across here, I'm able to, by referencing these values, now I'm able to get the correct dollar amounts in each one of those cells. And I'm just going to, basically I just did the format painter. So I selected, I wanted to take the format for these cells and apply them to the cells down here. Now, we have a new feature. We don't have to use an up and down button here. We can select any particular region, and you can see that the values will change from this drop-down box. Really pretty cool. So we can come in here, the same as we did before, and get rid of the legend since we have it on the top. Oh, I made a mistake here. What I should have done is selected these so I can actually have the values of the months on the bottom of the chart. There's a way to do that once it's selected, but it's quicker to redo it. Now you can see we have the graph, and we'll want to come in here and format the axis like we did before. We're going to fix it to 100,000 because that's what we're multiplying our random function by, so we know the max could be 100,000. And now as we change this, we will see the ability to view different regions. And we'll just take these and hide them. And might as well hide this also. Make these italicized. And this is really just cleaning up the visualization, just making it look a little bit nicer. I like to change these grid lines. There we go. So now we have the ability, instead of having to, if you wanted to go directly from the east and view mountain, in the previous visualization you had to click the down button. In this one you can actually select the drop down and go directly to a region. Main purpose of doing this exercise is to show you this is a slightly different interface for the users to be able to select values. And you can see that it gives them a little bit different view of how they can interact with the data. And we've basically been able to show how we can create a visualization of the data using offset in the previous module and now using VLookup.